Welcome to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. Tonight our topic is Alton, Illinois, the history and hauntings. I am your host, Spooky, and this is your other most awesome host, Raven.
Anyway, sorry about that. I don't know. My computer crashed. I told Spooky about it crashing earlier before, so it's just a part of technology. So hopefully you guys got the new link and have come over, and we'll just start over. Right, Spooky?
That's right. We'll just start over.
Go ahead.
I did. Welcome to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven.
Yeah, you have to do the whole show again. Now you're ruining it, so I'm going to have to work on the beginning.
I'm just kidding. Tonight is, like Raven was saying, this is my hood. I live 30 minutes from Alton, so this is an area that I do know something about. Alton is located in Madison County and is situated along the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers, just across from St. Louis, Missouri. At the 2010 census, the population was 27,865. It is famous for its limestone bluffs along the river north of the city and for its role preceding and during the Civil War, and as the hometown of jazz musician Miles Davis and the tallest known person in history, Robert Wadlow. It was also the site of the last debate between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas in 1858, and the former state penitentiary here held up to 12,000 Confederates, that was soldiers, sympathizers, whatever, during the Civil War. It also had a major role in the Underground Railroad, and Alton, Illinois has the distinction of being called one of the most haunted little towns in Illinois and the country. Now, I remember being told by an uncle when I was a kid that just about every house in town had a ghost or two, even the one he lived in. Now, we could go on and on and on and on about the history of Alton, and it is very rich in history, but that alone would probably take up the entire show. So instead, we decided to choose a few of the better known places in the city and talk about them. So, Raven, why don't you start us off?
Well, I will in a second, but I'm just going to give the little shout out to Nikki again, since the first part of the other video will no longer be used. So we're just saying hey to Nikki in Australia. Thank you for always supporting us and stuff like that. And she wanted us to do that. That was one of her suggestions. It's not something...
Hello, Nikki in Australia.
Yeah, it's not something we always do. But you know what? Things happen with computers and things crash.
That's true.
There's nothing I can do about it. I already warned Spooky about it earlier tonight. So... if we have any more issues and if it keeps happening, then we might just have to stream another day. But hopefully this will be the last of our issues.
Oh, I hope so. I also want to give a shout out to my niece Marquis and her boyfriend Jerry. They are listening tonight.
Anyway, I'm going to do one of the ones first. You know what I mean? Like, we could go on this forever because there's so many places at this in Alton that's supposedly haunted or whatever. But I think we're only going to do so many each, because we only have like 2 hours or whatever. But Mineral Springs Hotel, that's located off of 301 East Broadway Street. Now, a lot of people talk about this place, and it's kind of cool because it's kind of a neat old looking building from what I could tell, but it's right there, right by the river too. But this hotel, from what I was reading, was constructed by these two brothers. Their name were August and Herman. I think his last name was Luer, and I guess what they did was ended up using it more for kind of like they were like meat packers, and they ended up being pretty successful with their business for a while, and they intended to kind of open it and have it kind of like an ice storage plant on their property as well. But during the excavations, a natural spring kind of broke through and was kind of discovered, and so they kind of had the water tested, and that's when they decided to say it was kind of, they're going to go in more into like the medicinal quality type of thing. So they decided to turn it into like a spa.
Right.
And instead of doing ice. So they're like, oh, screw it. We can make more money if we just, start selling, water and claim it's all medicinal. You know what I mean? Which water is good for you anyway.
Back then, spas were big money.
Right. Well, they still are. today.
Yeah, well, that's true. They still are today, but back then they were really big money.
But so they decided they were going to do that instead of doing the ice business, whatever. First we're doing a little history in the building, then we're going to go into like the paranormal top, like we always do. But I'm a little off yet because with the computer crashing, it kind of threw me off for tonight. But anyway, the construction for this place kind of took in October of 1913, and they ended up putting like a swimming pool in the basement area. And then that June, I think the hotel kind of opened up then, and the building, I think, from what I remember, they were saying like it was 5 stories high, and it was kind of like a stucco Italian villa type of style building when they were doing it. And they had like marble staircase put in. They had like it was really decked out. They had art glass throughout the whole place and everything, and it was just really done elaborate, and it was really made just a really nice luxurious hotel, because obviously they were making into like the spa, so they wanted to get all these rich people to come there, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But the hotel, I guess what they really boasted the most about is just because from what I was reading, it was like the only swimming pool in the whole state of Illinois at that time. Plus, if you were swimming in it, it's supposedly supposed to cure you of all your like illnesses or whatever was going on. This is one of their big things that they were doing.
Yeah, because it was built to where this mineral spring fed the swimming pool. So when you got in there, you were actually in this mineral water.
Well, did they actually start bottling the water too and selling it for consumption as well? It wasn't just for swimming pool and for the hotel, but weren't they selling the bottles of water at the same time?
They did that later on. Yeah, they did that later on. And they were shipping to customers as far away as Memphis and New Orleans. So not only were they having these people come in to swim in this miraculous curing water, they were bottling it and selling it. These two guys were really savvy businessmen.
Yeah, can you go on for a bit? I have to fix something on the computer. So can you just keep going on?
Okay. In July of 1914, like Raven said, they were bottling water, and they were selling more than 100 bottles every day. And even that year, that increased to 350 gallons weekly. And the hotel boasted that it's the curing powers of this water equaled those of water found at Hot Springs, Arkansas, which at the time was really really a famous spa. It's basically where everybody was going. In 1918, the Hollywood actress Marie Dressler spoke at the hotel on behalf of the Liberty Loan Committee. At that time, she was this really, really big actress from Hollywood, and a number of new rooms were added to the hotel in 1925. Now, that same year, an orchestra was hired to play on Sunday afternoons for the evening dinners, and August Lure sold the hotel in 1926, but even then it thrived for many, many years afterwards, but it began to deteriorate in the 1950s. Now, in 1971, the mineral springs closed down for good, and despite efforts to restore the place to its former popularity and glory with the addition of this huge ballroom, but in 1978 it was restored by Robert Schubert, who developed the building as a mall featuring shops and restaurants. Years after that, it did receive further renovations by the Love family, and for a number of years now, the place has been a very busy antique mall, which is what it is today. When you walk inside, you find that there are still traces of the old hotel that still exist, including shops that are now housed in what used to be these spacious sleeping quarters, and the hotel's original safe, which they say still has this lingering smell of cigars that were once stored there. In the far reaches of the building, though, unused rooms still appear just as they did decades ago. They haven't restored this entire hotel. I think they did just like the first couple floors for these antique shops and coffee shops and stuff. The main attraction, though, or I should say one of the main attractions, is that the hotel is very haunted. The stories say that 3 different ghosts haunt the corridors and the rooms of the mineral springs. And, excuse me. The first one is said to be that of an itinerant artist who was unable to pay his hotel bill. And they say that his ghost apparently haunts the former hotel bar. Now, this section of the building is an antique store, but the saloon that once existed there was decorated with these fine woods and marbles and ornate trim and these gargoyle-like figures on the crossbeams. But all traces of the bar are gone except for an unfinished mural of the city of Alton that was painted on one wall. Now, the story is that the artist was allowed to paint this mural in exchange for his bill, but unfortunately he died before he was able to finish it, and his ghost has remained there ever since. Some people speculate that his ghost is still there because of this. He didn't finish what he was doing. Building tenants and visitors who have encountered him say that he is more of a benign presence really than a frightening one. He's usually standing around as though he has no idea of exactly where he is. Now, many describe him as looking slightly drunk, and others who don't even realize that he is a fan of spirit at first tell that he smelled faintly of liquor.
Right, because people sometimes thought it was a real person.
Right. They say that he just appears so solid that they just don't know that he's a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
They say the most frightening ghost of the hotel is the phantom that allegedly haunts the hotel swimming pool. Now, the hotel swimming pool, like Raven said earlier, it's in the basement. And during the early days of the business, the swimming pool was the big draw of this place. Now, throughout the 1920s, they had parties and receptions and around the pool, and of course, guests used this pool on a daily basis. But today, the swimming pool is closed off to visitors. Now, the story of this ghost began in the 1920s. And the story is one evening there was this large reception held at the Mineral Springs, and people were gathered in the pool area for the party. And one of the couples attending the event eventually had a volatile relationship, probably because the husband had quite an eye for the ladies. And, of course, throughout the evening, he was flirting, and he danced with a number of young women until his wife just couldn't stand it any longer. So in a fit of anger, she went over and she started shouting accusations at him. And, of course, he laughed at her, and he just attempted to brush off her concerns. But finally, she took off her shoe, and she smashed him in the face with the heel up.
Yeah, I always found that story kind of funny, too. She's kind of a little aggressive, don't you think?
Yeah, she sure did. Well, blood spurted out between his fingers of his hand because he was pressing his hands to his face, and he stumbled over and he collided with one of the columns that was next to the pool, and this really stunned him, and he fell into the water. But before anybody realized what was going on, he slipped underneath the water and he drowned. Now, what became of his wife is unknown. I couldn't find anything on her.
Right.
But to this day, the man has been seen standing near the side of the pool or in the lower parts of the building, and his ghost has been described as very angry and brooding. But he was impeccably dressed in black tie and tails. And, of course, you know, people are saying that he's waiting for his wife to return so he can get his revenge. the most famous ghost at the Mineral Springs is the legendary Jasmine Lady. Now, people say that she has haunted a particular part of the old hotel for years. And the area is a staircase that is located a short distance from the former lobby. Now, according to the hotel legend, this lady was once a guest at the hotel who had come there to take in the healing waters with her husband. And while she was there, she became romantically involved with another guest, and they started an affair.
Isn't that kind of, don't you think that's just a little, I mean, she's just on vacation, right? And then she's there
Right.
with her husband, and then all of a sudden she sees this other guy, and she's like, oh, you know what? I think I'm just going to start
I want
sleeping with
him.
him. Yeah, what is up with that?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I hear all kinds of stories like that from that era.
That happens in all eras, even today. You know, probably more so today than back then, because that's just how it goes, it seems. But that one threw me
Apparently,
off. You know, when I was reading about this stuff too. You know.
yeah. Well, one evening while her husband was away, she took this other man up to her room, and her husband returned unexpectedly and caught this couple in the act. Now, needless to say, he was enraged, and his frightened wife ran from him. The rest of the story is actually a mystery because no one knows if she tripped or if her husband pushed her, but she fell down the staircase and she died from a broken neck. Now, staff members, shop owners, and visitors to the building claim that they have caught glimpses of this woman's tragic fall down the stairs as her apparition replays this terrible event over and over and over. Mm-hmm. So I'm figuring that her residual haunting just at certain times just replays this tragic event. They also claim that they've caught whiffs of her really pungent
perfume. Did we just
by places in the
Yeah, your Skype, Spooky, your Skype keeps going in and out a little bit. Can you close any things that you don't need to have open? Because your Skype keeps cutting in and out. So I didn't hear like the last sentence of what you said.
Okay. I said they have claimed that they've caught whiffs of her really, really pungent jasmine perfume near the staircase and in other places of the building. And the shopkeepers in there now, not all of them, but some of them do claim to, still smell this. Apparently she wore it really strong. But there's been stories of other lesser ghosts haunting the place too. I mean, the Mineral Springs was a favorite place for gangsters to visit, and there have been stories of murder and unexplained deaths. But the three mentioned earlier seem to be the strongest. Mm-hmm. But I guess anywhere you got gangsters visiting on a regular basis, there's bound to be a murder or two or a missing person.
Yeah, that happens a lot. But I thought this place was interesting in general with a lot of things that are going on, but it seems like they have both active and residual.
I've been in there. It's a great building. I would love to go through that entire building, and I would even love to get up on, like the third, fourth, fifth floors. I think it's 5 stories tall. And just, if nothing else, to see the rooms there, because they didn't modernize the entire building. There are still rooms up there the same way they were back in the 1920s and 30s. It's almost like, they say when you walk into one of them, it's like walking back in time.
Right. Well, that's the neat thing about a lot of those older towns down, even actually where you're at, even around us too, but they keep a lot of these old buildings and people are restoring them back to the way that they were, or not really changing a lot and still keep using them, and it's neat. It's almost like, I don't know, you can almost feel the energy from back in the day as well.
Yeah.
I find it enjoyable. Why don't you go ahead and tell the next one too, because I just want to kind of keep an eye on the computer stuff a little bit. So just to make sure everything's running smooth. But why don't you tell them the next one, and then I'll join in later. I just want to keep making sure everything's running okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
The McPike Mansion. It's located at 2018 Albee Street. Now, this is a house that I have always been fascinated with. When I was a little girl and would go by this place, it just fascinated me. Of course, when I was a little girl, this place was empty. But I just thought it was a grand old house, and it was a shame that nobody lived in it. The house was built in 1869 for Henry Guest McPike. The McPike Mansion was constructed in an Italian Victorian style, and it is one of the more elaborate homes in Alton. It contains 16 rooms, a vaulted wine cellar. It was originally built on an estate of 15 acres.
Would you 15 acres? Wow, that's
15 acres.
Yeah. I'm just trying to catch you because you're talking a little fast, so it's hard to catch.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was built up on a hill that McPike named Mount Lookout. Mm-hmm. It was one of the most beautiful homes in the area. The McPike family lived on or at the estate for some time, even after the death of Henry McPike, but records are really unclear about some of the dates. It has been stated that they stayed in the house until around 1936, but there are records that say the home was owned by a Paul Leichinger, mm-hmm. The records say that he purchased the house in 1908 and lived there until his death around 1930. Now, Paul either lived in the house or he rented it out to tenants. That's not really clear. McPike, though, was interested in all things horticulture. So the estate was planted with these rare trees and shrubs, orchards, flowers, and extensive vineyards. As a matter of fact, Henry McPike was the propagator of the McPike grape, which became known across the country. And I think I read somewhere where this grape still exists. Mm-hmm. The McPike family can be traced back to Scotland. Henry McPike's ancestry includes a number of patriots who fought during the Revolutionary War. And this included Captain Moses Guest McPike of New Jersey and Captain James McPike, who both of them were at Valley Forge with George Washington. James McPike came west to Kentucky in 1795, and he brought his sons John and Richard. And Henry McPike was the son of John. Now, he came to Alton as a very young man in 1847. He soon became active in the business and political community of Alton, and over a period of years, he was involved in a number of different companies. He worked as a real estate agent, a box manufacturer, an insurance executive, along, with other things. He also became president of the oldest horticultural society in Illinois. Excuse me. Now, his political aspirations really didn't get off to a quick start, but he did have an interest in the abolishment of slavery. I don't know what's wrong with me tonight. Now, his father had been the editor of a Whig newspaper.
Yeah, and your Skype keeps cutting out too, so I don't know what kind of bars you have, but I'm just letting you know, so you might want to keep an eye on that a little bit.
Well, the bars are white. I don't know what the problem is.
Okay. Well, anyway, go on.
His father was the editor of a Whig newspaper, and for those who don't know, the Whig Party later became the Republican Party in the time of Abraham Lincoln. And his father was also an early advocate of the abolition of slavery. Mm-hmm. Good grief. Now, despite this, though McPike never sought political office, even though it was offered to him many times. Now, during the Civil War, he was called upon to act as deputy provost marshal of the district, so this put him in a management position in the War Department. And after this, he was said to have begun acting as a representative in many conventions and the city council, with the city council, and eventually he was mayor of Alton from 1887 to 1891.
Yeah, we apologize
Now,
to anybody who's listening. If you keep hearing all the audio cutting out, it has to do with her Skype. It has nothing to do with the computer thing. There's nothing I do about it. So tonight's just one of those weird nights again. So we apologize.
I know, it's just one thing after another, seems like.
It always happens.
I know. I would love to get through one show where nothing happened, that everything went according to plan, but
well,
doesn't.
We've had that, but in 2 years you're gonna have something happen here or there. It's just that's what happens with the internet, you know. So.
Despite all of these inaccuracies about dates, the house is listed in the National Registry of Historic Places, but it also has been listed on another not so prestigious list, the Landmarks Preservation Council of Illinois' list of the 10 most endangered historic places in the state. Now, the years have not been kind to the McPike Mansion, and it has been abandoned and in disrepair since the 1950s. Weather and vandals have caused major damage to the structure. And the house that once had a number of marble fireplaces and some very extravagant woodwork but all of that was stolen.
Thank you. Yeah, your Skype
Broken, plaster cracked and destroyed. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
Floors have deteriorated to the point that they're not even safe to walk on. The place is in desperate need of repair, but the enormous price tag makes this such a daunting task, because estimates for the roof alone were around $50,000. That's a lot of money for a roof. In 1994, Sharon and George Lutke purchased the house at auction. Now, they are continuing their efforts to restore the home and they want to turn it into a bed and breakfast or an historical attraction. But it's been an uphill battle because they have continued trying to bring attention to the house as a historical site with these tours and outings. Now, Sharon claims that the house is haunted, and I don't doubt this. I really
think there's
don't.
A lot of places that are haunted. I don't care, especially the older buildings. You know what I mean? They just hold so much energy. You know.
And this house has so much history that it would be a shame to lose it. It really would. Her unusual encounters at the house carry more weight, though, because given the time that she spends there, rather than the claims of trespassers and these so-called psychics and curiosity seekers who come to the house just simply because it looks haunted. Now, Sharon claims that the ghost of Paul haunts the place and seems to be, he is one of the few spirits who actually has a real historical connection to the house, besides the McPikes. She says that she had her first encounter with his ghost about 6 weeks after she bought the house. She was on the property watering some plants, and she saw a man standing in the window looking out toward where she was standing in the front yard.
Right. And
she said that a chill came over her, and she noted that the man who vanished right in front of her was wearing a striped shirt and a tie. Now, she has a photograph of Paul, and he's wearing an identical suit. Now, another spirit in the house is thought to be a domestic servant that Sharon named Sarah. She was only a presence with an assumed name until a man came by the house one day and actually presented her with some books that he had removed from the house something like 17 years before. And one of the books had the name Sarah Wells written inside of it. Now, since that time, Sharon has actually been hugged by this spirit. And she and her husband have occasionally caught the scent of lilac on the 3rd floor. Now, also, this spirit is believed to be the one that will take things and leave them on the stairs to the 3rd floor. Sharon also claims that the spirits of Mr. and Mrs. McPike still remain in the mansion. There is also a presence in the wine cellar, which is actually below the basement.
Mm-hmm.
But all the spirits in the house seem to be harmless, but they do let their presence be known. Now, today, this 15 acres is now like 4 acres. And one interesting fact is that recently a grave has been discovered on the property that was previously covered by brush and other overgrowths.
Usually when they
Now,
how did they find this grave, did they say?
I think they were, I'm not sure, I can only guess, but my guess is that they were out clearing the property, you know, because they have been working on this place. And they just, when they were clearing brush and stuff, they found this grave that they didn't know was there.
Usually when you find a grave, you have to call authorities because you don't know why it's there. It could be there because somebody murdered somebody. It could be Native American, or whatever. So usually when you find a body, you're supposed to call authorities right away.
They didn't find a body. They actually found an old grave with the headstone and everything. And I'm guessing that it was one of the previous owner's relatives, you know, maybe a child or something that had died and was buried there, because back then it was very common.
Yeah,
it was very common.
Right on your land, yeah.
Right on the property. And at the time, like I said, this was 15 acres. That was considered a lot of property, especially in a town.
4 acres.
But when he built this place, I think he is probably the only house up there.
Mm-hmm.
Because Alton is built along the bluffs.
Yes. There's a lot of, it's an interesting area for sure when I was Google mapping and checking it out.
It's a very interesting area. Yeah. And just down the hill from it is the limestone quarry. So, but like I said, when this house was built, it was probably the only house up on that hill, because it does sit right on top of a hill. Now the Lutke's, they hold tours of the wine cellar, the basement, and the grounds to raise money for the restorations. And it is my understanding that the house is not included in the tours because it's unsafe to go in there. But if you go to their website, they do have a schedule for 2016 posted. But they've been trying to restore this house, I know, at least 10 years. And it's got to be a very daunting task, because the house is in such disrepair, and it's desperate. It desperately needs to be restored.
Right. I don't even know if they can afford all of it. You know what I mean? Because it seems like it's been taking them a very long time. Because we've talked about this place off and on for years since I've known you.
I know, and sometimes I think that they're just holding the tours, you know, and not doing much on the house, because I go by this place at least once a week. And it just seems to me that they're, you know, nowadays are more interested in the tours, because I can't see where they've really done anything. The last thing that I've noticed was over a year ago, where they boarded up these huge windows. But, I mean, I don't know what they're doing.
So there's some.
I would love to have the money to buy this place and restore it, because I definitely would. And I would move into it. I'd live there. I wouldn't care.
I think at this point it would cost a lot just to fix it.
Yeah, if you saw the place in person, I would say it would take $500,000 or more to restore this place. That's the kind of condition that it's in. And don't get me wrong, they have done things to the house, but it's to the point that the floors are, from what I hear, are no longer safe to walk across.
Well, then they shouldn't be having tours and stuff in there. Well,
that's what I think, but I just think it would be a shame to lose this place. I really do. Like I said, this place has fascinated me since I was a kid. Every time we'd go by this house, you know, even as a kid, I always thought that it was just such a shame that nobody lived there. Of course, when I was a kid, it was in a lot better shape, it looked like. But you got, you know, the weather, vandals. Vandals went in there. He used to have these ornate mantles to the fireplaces, and I was told that his motif in there was like grapes, you know, because he was the one that invented that grape. And people just went in there and just stole that stuff, or they vandalized the inside. You know, people in the area, or the kids in the area would have parties in there or whatever, just go in and vandalize it. It was just one of those places. It looked like a haunted house.
Well,
So they went in there.
Well, wait. It's a beautiful looking house when they built it, and I'm sure everything, when it was good for a long time, it was probably amazing and beautiful.
16 rooms, you know, at the time, that was quite a house. 16 rooms. And even in the basement, you know, I was surprised to find that, or I thought it was interesting. I wasn't surprised, but I thought it was interesting that the wine cellar was below the basement, you know, was lower than the basement, you know, a couple steps or whatever. But it just, I think it's just a shame that this place is just, I hope they do something before the place is condemned, because once it's condemned, you don't have much hope of really restoring it.
Right. Well, it happens with a lot of places or whatever, but, you know, I think I've seen some things on YouTube where people were inside showing.
You know that show, Paranormal Fact or Faked? That show, Ghost Lab's been there, you know. I mean, you've had some of these paranormal shows go in there. There's been videos where something was in the basement. I don't know. I don't know if they're more interested in being on these shows or restoring the place. Like I said, if I had the money, I would buy that place from them and I would restore it and I'd live in it. Of course, I'd have to, because I'd probably spend all my money restoring it. But
yeah.
So I would have to turn it into a bed and breakfast just to make a living. But I would just, and if the house was closer to me, I would love to have that house. I would do anything to restore that house.
Now, did you say you went by this place before?
I go by this place an average of once a week, you know, like going to the doctor, going down to Alton, you know, for stuff. And I'm down in Alton at least, well, I wouldn't say once a week, I would say twice a month. But every time I'm in Alton, I always take the route where I have to go in front of this house. And every time I go in front, you know, every time I go by the house, it just breaks my heart to see it.
Yeah, well, it happens. I don't know. Do you want to take a break, or do you want to just keep going on with the rest of the show?
Why don't we take a quick break so I can redo my Skype and maybe I'll sound better?
Okay, guys, we're just going to take like a 3-minute break and see if she can fix her Skype or whatever, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the history and hauntings of Alton. So we'll be right back in like 3 minutes. Welcome back to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. I'm your host, Raven, and Spooky's back. We just want to say thank you guys for sticking with us, and we apologize for the technical issues. And it happen once in a while. We can't do anything about it, but Spooky's going to carry on with the rest of the different areas that seem about the history and the hauntings of Alton, Illinois, because she's from around that area. So, welcome back, Spooky.
Thank you. Glad to be back. We're having bad weather out here too, so that may have something to do with my end of it.
With your Skype, yeah. It always messes with your internet.
I know it does. These small towns, you can't get good service on anything. So I shouldn't say that. I really shouldn't. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to talk about the old Confederate Prison. It's located at the corner of Broadway and William Streets as you are leaving town on the Great River Road heading west. There's really no address to that place.
But it's isn't it near that one, down by the river, though?
Yeah, it's down by the river. You're getting ready to leave.
You're cutting out again, so I don't know, just keep trying talking.
As you're going out, you have ConAgra on your left, and just across the street behind the Irish pub is what's left of that prison. All that's left is just a portion of a wall. The prison was built in 1833, and it was the first prison in the state of Illinois. Now, building the prison, it was financed by the sale of the saline salt lands in southern Illinois. Now, this is ironic because the saline salt lands was the only place in Illinois where slavery was legal.
Just in that one spot? Just that one area?
Just in that one area, the saline salt lands. And also the prison would later be used to house Confederate soldiers who were captured during the Civil War. I found that ironic. The place was plagued by rats and disease, and in 1847, a social reformer named Dorothea Dix visited the prison, and she declared it an unfit place even for criminals. But in spite of this, it would, like I said, it would later be used for Confederate prisoners. The first building was completed in 1833, and it contained 24 cells. Now, the legislature at that same time amended the criminal code to do away with stocks and whippings as punishment, and instead adopted confinement and hard labor. It was also leased from the state by an individual, I think his name was Buckmaster, who would then house, clothe, feed, and guard the prisoners. And this person would also pay for any medical care for the prisoners. And he would also receive $5,000 from the state and take the position of warden. He also became responsible for conditions at the prison as money was allowed. Now, in 1846, 96 new cells were added, as well as the warden's residence. And by 1857, there were 257 cells with 2 prisoners to a cell. Now, I found nothing on how the leasing system worked, and needless to say, I'm sure the warden pocketed some of the money because the conditions at this prison deteriorated so badly that a new prison was built in Joliet in 1859. Joliet is up by Chicago. And prisoners were transferred to that prison in May of that year. And they transferred them in batches of 40 to 50 prisoners at a time. I'm surprised they didn't have a lot of escapes, that many prisoners at one time. By June of 1860, the prison at Alton was abandoned completely. Now, in the early years of the Civil War, because of its location to Missouri and access to the river, Alton was made a military post. And the first garrison stationed there was under the command of William T. Sherman, General William T. Sherman. Anybody that knows anything about the Civil War knows who that guy is. And by 1862, it was obvious that the war was not going to end anytime soon, and with the growing number of prisoners, this General Halleck got permission to use the old abandoned prison as a military prison, and the first prisoners arrived in February of 1862. Now, at that time, this Buckmaster still had the lease on the prison, so guess who became the warden?
You? No, just kidding.
No,
That'd be awesome.
I think his name was Buckmaster. Buck something. Now, not
That's an
like
interesting name, Buckmaster.
Yeah, I know. Not all of the prisoners were soldiers. Some were spies, bridge burners, train wreckers, guerrilla fighters, and Southern sympathizers. And there were even a few women incarcerated there. In fact, 2 of the women died. Now, there is so much history connected to this prison that we could almost do an entire show on it. The conditions at this prison were so bad and horrendous that it rivaled Andersonville in Georgia, which was at that time considered the worst prison of the Civil War. And surprisingly, there were very few
That
escapes.
was the worst prison for Civil War. I mean, there was some really horrific ones that we've talked about in different states.
Well, Andersonville was the most famous prison because the conditions there were so bad. And, I mean, that was a prison where there was almost standing room only. They had so many prisoners there. And this prison at Alton was, I mean, it, like I said, it rivaled Andersonville.
It's probably like where they just, I bet this is another place where the prisoners weren't really taken care of.
They weren't. They were not taken care of. And surprisingly, though, there were very few escapes from this prison, mostly because of poor health of the prisoners. They couldn't get up and go. There were a few, like somebody set one of the buildings on fire, and during that confusion, there were prisoners that escaped. But most of the prisoners were just in poor health. They just couldn't do it. They just couldn't get up the energy to escape. And this was a prison that was built to hold 1,300 prisoners, but it was occupied by several thousand prisoners, and newer prisoners arrived on a regular basis. So it's really not hard to imagine how sick these people had become. And most of the men were badly clothed. Food was often withheld. If the warden got mad at someone, he just withheld the food from all of them. It was either withheld or it wasn't edible. There were no bathing facilities. Gnats and lice were common. It was infested with rats. Had diseases like dysentery, scurvy, anemia, typhoid, all of these. Smallpox, there was a smallpox outbreak. Well, if you stop and think about this, during the Civil War, on both sides, the North and South, there were 620,000 soldiers killed. And for every one soldier killed in battle, 2 died of diseases.
Really?
Really.
Dang. That's kind of...
I know. You had like diphtheria, typhoid, measles. Dysentery killed a lot of them. Matter of fact, dysentery killed most of them. In 1863, a smallpox epidemic broke out. Now, smallpox was the most feared because it was contracted by direct contact. And there was little one could do to treat it except to let it run its course. So many of these prisoners died of it. And this was actually mostly due to the fact that there was no help to treat it. And with the large number of prisoners, it spread through the prison like wildfire because of the unsanitary conditions. And the authorities of Alton would not let the prisoners be treated outside the prison.
Well, they had their reasoning, you know why.
Yeah, but the death toll became so high that finding a place to bury them became difficult. So they were buried on this small island in the middle of the river, and there was also like a small hospital there because they put some of the prisoners on this island, and it was referred to as Smallpox Island. Today, because of the lock and dam, the island no longer exists. It's underwater.
Mm-hmm.
And the estimates of the dead were from 1,000 to 5,000, even though the official number is listed as 1,300 to 1,400. And a little note on Smallpox Island here, just a few years ago, 3-4 years ago back, they found a skeleton on one of the islands out in the middle of the river, and when they examined it and ran tests and everything, the skeleton was 150 years old. So I'm going to guess it was one of those prisoners.
How do they know it was 150 years old?
Well, they have a way of dating that, figuring, an anthropologist looked at this because the bones looked old. So they had an anthropologist examining it and everything, and he said that the skeleton was at least 150 years old. And, of course, when they first found it, at first it was treated like a murder scene, but then they found out, hey, that guy's 150 years old.
Yeah. You could slow down a little bit. Maybe why you keep getting tongue-tied is you're talking really fast, and we still have a whole hour left, so...
Yeah, I know. Now, after the war, the prison was closed again. Now, there was a brief effort, though, to use it again as a state facility, but that failed, and the prison was abandoned completely. Now, the walls were torn down between 1870 and 1875, and the stone, or most of it, was hauled off for other projects.
Oh, could you imagine? Because there were so many bad things occurring there, and then all of a sudden they move these stones to other places. I can see why there'd be residual hauntings happening all over the place.
Yeah. Well, even some of the former prisoners came back and took stone to be used as their own grave markers. I never quite understood that, but I guess to them, that was just something they had to do. People, the locals, when they needed stone for a project, like to build a house or a rock wall around their property or whatever, because like I said, Alton is built on a bluff. Load what they needed and carry it off. And later, the area was turned into the Uncle Remus Playground and Park for children. Now, in 1973, the last remaining section of the wall was moved and reconstructed along William Street as a monument to the past. You can go up there, and look at it and read the plaque and everything. And the area where the prison stood, it's now a parking lot. But like I said, the small section of that wall is all that remains. Now, you would not think that there would be anything left for a haunting.
But that doesn't matter. You don't need a building to have haunted land,
Oh, that's true. And there's been lots of encounters of apparitions in that parking lot where the prison stood. Residents and passerbys, through the years, they've claimed to have seen apparitions of men and soldiers standing around on the parking lot. They've been described as ragged-looking, dirty, unshaven. Some of these apparitions have been so solid that people who have seen them thought they were homeless people until they just disappeared in front of them. Other reports are voices, moaning, loud crying. Like I said, to this day, the parking lot and a section of the wall are still there, but the park is no longer there. It was abandoned because children became afraid to play there because children were encountering things. And it just got to the point that they just would not go to that park. So it's kind of overgrown at the end of the parking lot now.
Well, yeah, that's the picture I found from off of Google Maps when you kind of cruise around and whatever, the only photo we can use. But to me, it seems like that place would have a lot of residual just because of what happened to all the people there,
Yeah. Exactly. And like I said, there's been a lot of encounters in that parking lot, and they still go on today.
Right. And if people are wondering why I'm not really talking, tonight's kind of like Spooky's night because this is down in her area, so this was like her thing, So I was on vacation, so tonight's kind of like her show topic night. So
Plus, Raven, since because of our
all the
issues in the beginning,
PCs and everything, so we're
yeah,
kind of having issues, so I'm just trying to maintain and watch the computer stuff, make sure everything
right.
still
She's
goes.
she's trying to keep ahead of any
Any
trouble that
trouble
we
that's
might have.
yeah. So why don't you go on to
Any problems?
the other one?
Okay, the First Unitarian Church. This church is located at 110 East 3rd Street. Now, the First Unitarian Society was started in Alton in 1836. And at the time, Alton's first physician, Dr. William Emerson, invited this speaker named William Elliot to speak at a private meeting that was held in Dr. Emerson's office. Now, Elliot was the founder of Elliott Seminary in St. Louis that later became Washington University. And he was also the grandfather of the poet T.S. Eliot. Now, Eliot traveled widely in the area, speaking in small meetings in homes and buildings. He was trying to create an interest in the Unitarian faith, and he succeeded in Alton. And that same year, the first Unitarian Society of Alton was organized. Now, the Unitarian faith was considered the bastion of free thinkers in its early years, and it attracted many of the writers and poets of the time, like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, among others. The church is based on the freedom of belief among its members. It has no official creed or doctrine, and it allows its members to have their own particular beliefs. So basically, the Unitarian Church stands for the worth and dignity of every person and compassion in human relations, the acceptance of other people, and a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and the basic goodness of the human soul. In fact, the first minister of the Alton Church, Charles Farley, in one of his early sermons, pretty well summed it up by saying, do you now ask which is the true church? Unitarians basically believe that no religion is wrong.
That's their belief.
That is their belief.
Yeah, we're not here to push anything.
I'm not saying I agree with this or I disagree with this. This is just what the Unitarians believe. They believe that no religion is wrong. And they have members that include Wiccans and even atheists. So, I mean, anybody can attend these churches.
Keep going.
But anyway, they believe in the good of all religions. Now, this way of thinking sounds.
I think your Skype went out, Spooky. Spooky. Your Skype cut out for like 2 minutes. So.
Widely accepted.
Spooky, can you
hear
me?
And in those days, Alton was a dangerous.
Spooky.
Yes.
Your Skype's cutting out like the past 3 minutes, so anything or everything that you said's been like nothing.
What's the last thing you heard?
I don't even know. Like Alton Society of Alton was organized, or I don't even know what you said anymore, to be honest. Because I don't know if it's your storm that's making your Skype go or what, because it's not on my end. So.
Okay. Like I said, the Unitarian Church pretty much believes that no religion is wrong. Now, this way of thinking sounded pretty good to a lot of people, but in a rough frontier town like Alton, it was considered very radical. And it would be years before the Unitarians would be widely accepted. And in those days, Alton was a dangerous place for free thinkers and abolitionist. Reverend Farley was a friend of another local minister named Elijah P. Lovejoy. Now, this guy was very famous in history. Maybe not at this time, but you can look him up. You're going to find a lot on him. And he is also considered to be, he was murdered, and he's also actually considered to be the first white man to be killed in the name of slavery. But Lovejoy and Farley strongly supported anti-slavery.
When you say Lovejoy, I think of The Simpsons, because that was the character's name was on there was Lovejoy, remember?
Yeah. I didn't watch Symptoms that much, but I do remember that name.
Well, there's just a different time difference, but you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. Now, soon after Lovejoy was murdered, Farley was approached by two men who informed him that his support of Lovejoy caused his name to be placed on a very short list of those who might consider leaving town. And Farley took their advice, and he returned back east. For years following, the society members continued to meet in private homes and various buildings in Alton, and in 1854 they purchased a plot of land where Alton's original Catholic church, St. Matthew's, was located. Now, St. Matthew's was gutted by fire, and rather than rebuild it, they built a new cathedral along State Street. And through the years, it's really funny. The area around State Street was considered Christian Hill, which it still is referred to as Christian Hill today. And where the Unitarian Church stands, that is considered Heathen Hill. And it's still considered Heathen Hill today.
No comment.
Really. But anyway, they... rather than rebuild the church there where it burnt down, they just moved it to State Street. Now, the land and the ruins of the church were sold to the Unitarian Society, and they used the stone and the foundation from the Catholic Church and constructed a new building. Now, in fact, today you can still see the remnants of the earlier building, including the rock walls and an early staircase in the lower levels of the church. And there are also twisting passages in the old foundation that make some believe that this church was once used as a station on the Underground Railroad. Legend had it that this was the case, but there's really been no real exploration of this dirt-floored passage until the spring of 2003, when a search did reveal a small room where slaves may have hidden during the daylight hours. Because back then, they traveled at night. And if I remember right from what I read, this room was actually underneath the sidewalk in front or maybe to the side of the church. But at the time, the minister of the new Unitarian Church was William Haley. Now, he became known as a local crusader for social and political change, and his sermons soon found interest among the people outside of the church and in a city that was infamous for lynching liberals.
Does not sound like a good place to live at that time.
Oh, Alton was something else during that time. I mean, if you did not think like everybody else, hang 'em. What the heck? He soon realized that most were really not in full agreement with his views, and after a couple of threatening encounters, he submitted his resignation to the church. But in July of 1850, now this was in July of 1856, and the church met to really consider his resignation, and they voted not to accept it. After a long and heated debate that resulted in establishing the freedom of the Alton pulpit on an equal with other Unitarian churches, Haley was welcome to preach whatever he wanted to, and the people who listened were either welcome to accept it or not accept it. So Haley withdrew his resignation. Now, this church did grow and flourish over the years. Dr. Elliott returned as a minister during the Civil War. And then in 1866, the first advanced school, which is a high school, was founded in the basement of this church. A brick parsonage was constructed in 1878, and in 1905 there was this one unfortunate event where the church was burned, but it was quickly rebuilt in the style that you see today. The church has had its share of pastors over the years, but one of them left a greater mark on the church than any of the others, and his name was Philip Mercer, because not only did he gain a reputation as this kind and caring man, but he also left a lasting impression on the church. And that's because, according to some, Philip Mercer never left. Reverend Mercer was born and raised in England. He was just 18 years old when he came to America, and at the time of his death, he had been in this country for like 30 years. But he never lost his slight accent or, his proper English character. And no one ever really knew anything about him. He always had this strict sense of propriety, and he never revealed much about his personal life. But everyone he met liked him, and people always described him as this friendly and caring man. But he was a bit of a worrier when it came to his health. He had gone on a vacation out west, and when he came back, he suddenly had this great worry over his health, and no one knows what happened to him or what took place on this vacation. He did live in St. Louis for a time, and he spoke a lot about the great amount of reading that he did at the library. And aside from his steady job of working for the railroad, he spent all of his spare time reading. At some point, his interest, though, turned to religious matters and the Unitarian Church. So he attended a congregational preparatory school, and he became a Unitarian minister. Now, he did have several postings in small towns in like Minnesota and the Dakotas before he came to Alton in 1928. And many times he stated that his service in the Alton Church were the happiest times he had ever known. But in the early morning hours of November 20th of 1934, for some reason, he committed suicide.
How do you be the happiest person ever and then commit suicide?
I don't know, but apparently he did. Actually, his death is really, to this day, a mystery, because really, from what I've read on this, I don't think people know if it was a suicide or he was murdered because of his beliefs.
I wonder if it was possibly a murder.
There was no suicide note left.
If he's such a happy guy and was doing all these positive things, doesn't seem like he would go and off himself, though.
I know. I thought that too. I thought that, well, that's odd, a happy guy doing that. But like I said, the reason for his death to this day is a mystery. His body was discovered by his friend James McKinney. McKinney had become concerned when Mercer didn't return home on Monday evening. He had actually rented a room from McKinney. And he had for like 5 years. But Mercer had often attended concerts and musical events in St. Louis, so McKinney thought that maybe he had spent the night in the city. But by early afternoon, he got very concerned, because normally Mercer would tell McKinney if he would be gone for the night, and this time he never said anything about it. As a matter of fact, he had given his sermon on Sunday, and they said that he seemed... the sermon was okay, but he seemed to rush through it. Now, just as it was getting dark, McKinney walked to the church, and as he got close, he did notice that the lights were on in the rear rooms. So going to the door at the west rear of the building, he opened it and he started inside, but he looked up and he saw Mercer hanging lifeless at the end of a rope from the transom above his office door. So he ran across the street to the Alton police station, and he informed the desk sergeant of what he had seen, and this patrolman was assigned to accompany him back to the church. Well, the police officer contacted the coroner, I think his name was Clunk, and some of the trustees of the church were notified.
Did you say Clunk?
Clunk.
That's an interesting name.
Yeah, it is, but there's a lot of them in this area. So it's actually a common name around here. Mercer's body was taken down and sent to the Clunk Funeral Home, where visitation and a funeral service were held, and his body was placed in the Grandview Mausoleum, awaiting instructions from his family in England, but no instructions ever came, and the body is in the mausoleum to this day. Now, one of the unique things about the Unitarian Church, they actually have a person whose job is to record all the paranormal encounters by the parishioners. In fact, her title is spiritual historian. I think her name is Pam Flatch or something like that. Now, she got interested in the strange events because of something that happened to her. One evening in 1997, when she was at the church to drop some things off, no one was there, but the door was unlocked. So she searched for someone in the church, but she was alone. She couldn't find anybody. She even tried to call the minister to let him know that the church was unlocked, but she got no answer. So she walked around, and as she entered the sanctuary, she had this feeling that she was not alone. So she hurried out the door, but still being concerned that the church was unlocked, she started to go back inside to try to reach someone, call them to tell them. And when she tried to re-enter, the door was locked. Now, she kept this encounter to herself, and when she did tell someone, she found that many people had encounters while in this church for different reasons. There was a couple in there trying to make plans for their wedding, and they kept seeing these shadows and kept hearing footsteps when nobody was in this church but them. I didn't find out exactly how Pam got her job and title, but she recorded everything. Feelings, apparition sightings, smells, strange voices, everything that was reported, she recorded it. So there should be a really good record of the hauntings in this church. Now, while the sanctuary seems to be the most active, there have also been the sound of heavy footprints, but when investigated, there was no one there. And there's been many reports of voices being heard in the basement. And I'm talking about, they reported a lot of voices, like they were having a party down there or a meeting or just whatever. And when they would call down into the basement, the voices immediately stopped.
Why would they call down? Why not just walk down there and find out what's going on? That's what I'd do.
That's what I would do too, but apparently they don't like the basement. Probably because there's also been apparitions of soldiers reported. And this report is a bit puzzling about the soldiers. But it should also be noted, though, that some of the stone from the old prison...
I think Spooky, your Skype's gone. Hopefully she's not gone for good. Can't hear her, so...
wore era uniforms, and some who looked sickly and very dirty. And I don't know, what could be haunting this church. What's the matter?
Oh, your Skype keeps going out pretty bad. Big gaps or whatever. So tonight's just going to be like fill in the blanks.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what could be haunting this church, But according to what I found, the only tragic event that took place was the suicide of Reverend Mercer. So I can understand that maybe, he is, like some do believe, he is haunting the sanctuary. But I do believe that the use of the stone from the old prison could be the cause of some of the hauntings because of the horrendous events that took place there. And I believe the limestone held the energy from there, and no matter where this limestone was used, that energy went with it. Because the Unitarian Church is not the only building in Alton that used those stones. There were other buildings and even homes where this stone was used. Now, I can't say for sure if the Unitarian Church offers tours, but it is on the ghost tour. But I am told that they do welcome new members, so if you are in Alton, it may be worth it to stop and ask.
Well,
and no, I'm not reading from Wikipedia.
I didn't say you were.
I saw that.
There's somebody else.
I know somebody else said that
in chat. But we gather our notes and everything from all over the place, so you may find similarities throughout the whole net. But like this was
well,
spooky.
That's true,
this
but
is
I do
your
know
show, and you live down in Illinois, so you know
I do.
a lot
I
of this
do know.
information on your own.
One thing I do know, is my area, and I do know the history and stuff of Alton. Plus, I do a lot of paranormal investigations, and I even there is even a haunted place that I go and help out at every once in a while.
Yeah, what's the heck that mansion called again? It's what's
Cheney.
That place? Yeah, McCheney. Cheney. Well, we shared some photos from that place that you actually have when you were there.
That I took myself, yeah.
Yeah, we apologize for tonight. I don't know, Spooky has a storm. My computer was having issues earlier or whatever, so, and this was Spooky's topic. She's from down in this area or whatever, so that's why she's, talking all tonight anyway, and I'm just trying to maintain the computer and make sure it keeps going. But do you want to go on to the next one, Spooky?
Okay, Mansion House.
I'll find the photo.
500 block of State Street. Now, this was built in 1834 by Captain Botkin, and he operated the place for a lot of years as a hotel, and matter of fact, at one time, it was the only hotel in Alton. The building was later used as a Catholic boarding school by the nuns of the Ursuline Order and the Daughters of Charity, who in 1864, at the height of the smallpox epidemic, were at the Alton prison helping out down there, nursing the soldiers and the prisoners and such. The house was turned into a hospital, and in fact, it was the very first hospital in the city. Three daughters of Charity nuns from St. Louis responded to this plea from President Lincoln to come to Alton and try to get the smallpox epidemic under control. So they started treating not only the townspeople, but they also went over to Smallpox Island and treated the soldiers, and they went to the prison, just anywhere they were needed. And gradually the epidemic, just started to subside. Now, the legends say that many people who had come down with this dreaded disease died in the mansion house, and they claim that their ghosts still walk there. And but they are not the only ghosts that are there. Now, according to stories and even historical records, the mansion house is the first documented haunted house in Alton, and it was haunted long before the Civil War. The most famous resident is the ghost of a man named Tom Boothby. He was a grizzled old Indian fighter who came to live there in 1836. Now, Boothby had also been part of the Indian battles there in the War of 1812. I mean, this guy was an Indian fighter from way back. And as a result, when he retired to Alton, he had only one arm and one eye because an arrow put out the other eye.
You say that so nonchalant, like, oh, well, Arrow just put out his other eye.
Arrow put, well, he was in the Indian Wars, what else was going to do it?
Well, that's pretty serious. You're like, oh, and he lost his eye because of Arrow. Anyway, da-da-da-da. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
You crack me up the way you talk sometimes.
Oh, well, I'm sorry about that. That is serious, though. I mean, you're right.
Here, Frank, have a cigarette. Sorry you lost your eye.
Well, he took a downstairs room in the back left corner of the house, and he quickly became known as an eccentric recluse. Now, it is believed that he did not death in 1838, and he hired this boy to deliver his meals to him each morning, and the following day he would leave the empty tray and the payment for this young man when he delivered a full one. Now, Boothby became well known at the mansion house. He was obsessed with the idea that the ghost of the Indians he had killed in the past were coming to kill him. So he'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming. So needless to say, of course, this woke the other tenants in the house up, and pretty soon one of them would be pounding on Boothby's door, to settle him down. And they said that he never did open the door, but he would just murmur a few words of apology, and they said the rest of the night would just pass peacefully. Now, apparently this took place most nights, probably every night, because it happened so often that, it got to the point that the residents that had been there for a while would ignore it. And only the most recent tenants would even bother to go down there, and bang on his door. But pretty soon, though, they learned to ignore him too. Now, this went on for 2 years, and rumors really spread throughout the city that Boothby had been moving from town to town along the Mississippi, hoping to stay one step ahead of the ghosts who were chasing him. So he was just dismissed as a lunatic. Now,
you're just crazy.
And I can see why.
I'm sorry, but some of the things you're saying on this last story, I don't want to be comical about it, but it's the way that you're saying it that you can't help but laugh at some of it. You're like, oh, sorry, you're just a lunatic. Get out of here.
Yeah, you're just a lunatic.
Or like some.
But I can understand why they just dismissed him as a lunatic. I mean, he was a recluse. He never went anywhere. He screamed during the night. I wouldn't exactly say he was a lunatic unless he was walking through town talking to himself. But this guy never left his room.
There's probably other people who do that in town already, so that job's taken.
I got a neighbor that does that. I don't call her a lunatic. I call her nuts, but, that woman's another story. Well, anyway, one night his screams were different. Mm-hmm. I mean, instead of crying that the Indians were coming to kill him, Boothby yelled for help, screaming that the savages were strangling him. Now, if those screams woke anyone up, nobody went to his aid. Because these guests had been awakened so many times before that they had trained themselves to just simply ignore him. So the next day, this young man comes to deliver Boothby's meal, and he picked up the empty tray and he left a full one, just as he always did. Well, the following morning, he knew something was wrong because the tray from the day before was untouched. And this was something that had never happened, in 2 years. This had never happened. So this young man went and fetched the owner of the hotel, and he opened the door, and they found Boothby inside. He was sprawled sideways across his bed. His nightshirt was ripped and torn, and like he had been involved in a struggle, and his one good eye stared wide with fright. Now,
Whoa.
Boothby, yeah.
That's kind of scary. I wonder what happened.
That's freaky.
Yeah.
Well, he had screamed that the Indians were strangling him. but it was his own good hand that was tightly holding on to his throat. So apparently he'd strangled himself.
Do you think
I don't
maybe
know.
a spirit manipulated him to? Because
I really don't know, because there were no reports of this place being haunted until after Boothby died.
but how do you choke your own self with your own hand? At some point, you'd pass out before you probably kill yourself. I would think.
You would think so. You would think that you would pass out before you died.
Yeah, I mean, did he have such a grip that it stayed
And
the whole
and to
time?
be honest with you, I don't know if it's even possible to strangle yourself with your own hands.
With one
I
hand,
can't
yeah,
see
I
how
don't
it would
know.
be.
Yeah, I just that seems very odd. I would be.
I
I
know it
don't
was
know.
very odd. Very odd. And I found that odd too. But there are records that show Boothby did live there.
That's
So
fascinating.
I don't know what happened to this poor man. I really don't.
Yeah,
Um,
it's awful, but I mean, it's you don't hear that every, too often. I mean, I was just kind of taken back by that, because I don't know this
yeah,
story. You do, so that's why I'm kind of like the viewers tonight, listening and like, whoa, So
yeah. And this was actually one of the more interesting stories down there. Um, but it's been said that Boothby has never rested. They can still hear his cries and his footsteps, and they were heard in the house, and they still continue to be heard there through all of these years. When the mansion house was still used as a hotel, it was said that only guests who didn't know the story were given his own old room. If somebody went there and they knew the story, they would refuse that room. It was said, and also that way, if they were woken up by the sounds of his spirit screaming, they would think it was coming from some other room. Now, today the house is leased as private apartments, and it was made into private apartments, and it's not open to the public. But
I
this
thought there was a
doesn't
fire or something. Oh, go on anyway. Sorry.
this doesn't stop the stories about Tom Boothby from being told. In October of 2000, there was this couple that were new to Alton, and they were telling about the strange things that were taking place in their apartment in the mansion house. And they described the sound of a man's footsteps and even the sound of these screams and these cries. And they also mentioned that their apartment was downstairs in the back left corner of the building. And they had never heard of Tom Boothby.
Was the official report that he died from strangulation?
Um, I don't know. I couldn't find what the official report was. But anyway, when this couple heard the story, they probably moved. But there is a note to this. The mansion house no longer exists. A fire broke out in that back apartment, and it burned to the ground. And I think this happened in 2014. It was just very recent that this happened. And all that's left now is an empty lot.
Yeah, you can. I think you can find the video of the firemen trying to put out this building's fire, but it was completely destroyed.
Yeah, and at the time, this was considered the most historic building in Alton. This was, and like I said, this was the first documented haunted house in Alton, and it was documented as a haunted house before the Civil War.
Oh, there goes
So historic
Wait, your
this
Skype.
place go back a
Yeah,
long time.
yeah. I don't know the last two lines you said, but I think you said this historic something goes back a long what?
I said that this was considered the most historical building in Alton, and the historical records on this place go back a long time.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating story, and I don't know, the guy losing his eye to strangling himself, and I guess we don't really know the official result of why he died, but I mean, a lot of this was just, I was kind of like in awe of, like, by what you were telling.
I know. I found that story to be the story about the mansion house, the most interesting story. I had been by when it still stood. I had been by the mansion house lots of times. I mean, I make frequent trips to Alton, and some of there are some places or some streets that I used to just love to go down, like State Street, for instance. When you get to State Street, closer to downtown, that's where all the mansions sit. That's in the Christian Hill area. And then there's another street that I like to take called Henry Street, and that's what they call Millionaire Row. And then there is also a section in Alton called the Fairmont Edition, and there are actually castles up there. Those houses are so big, I call them castles. So
yeah.
I like to, when I have to go to Alton, I like to take the time and just drive around in certain sections. And I had been by that mansion house many, many times. And it is kind of strange, though, to go down that way and just, it's not there anymore.
I have a hard time believing how somebody could strangle themselves. Something had to either there were spirits there manipulating, and haunting him and helped kill him. I don't know how you could strangle your own self with your hand. I think you'd pass out at some point and then wake up.
I can't see how you could strangle yourself with one hand. That's like holding your breath, I mean, no, you can't hold your breath till you die. It's almost impossible. Now, I said almost. I didn't say it was impossible. But after a time, you're going to get lightheaded and maybe even pass out if you're able enough to hold your breath that long. I just cannot see how it is possible to strangle yourself with your own hands, let alone one hand. I don't know what happened to this man. He could have been frightened to death, because, I mean, let's face it, he was an odd character. He was just convinced that all these Indians he had killed were haunting him. And maybe they were.
Maybe that does occur, when, people are forced to go to war and take other lives. Not that they really want to do it, but sometimes it happens. And maybe these spirits, who knows? We don't know. Maybe they are angry or upset and they want revenge for the loss of their life. Who knows? We don't really know when it comes to things like this,
Yeah.
You just tell stories,
Yeah, and plus, I mean, he was an old man. He'd been around for years and years and years. He'd been an Indian fighter, most of his life. Maybe it was just his time to go. The problem is is that he didn't go in a very good way. He went having nightmares, and maybe that's what it was too. Maybe it was just nightmares. Who knows?
How do you I hope I never have a nightmare that bad where I choke myself to death.
No, I'm talking about nightmares making him think that these Indian ghosts were chasing him.
Oh, I see.
To do him harm.
I see what you mean.
I mean, there could have been some that were chasing him to get their revenge, because when they walked in there, he had a look of fright on his face. Something scared the man.
Right. Well, it's definitely an interesting thing, and again, everybody can go and read more than what you're just saying tonight too, or whatever. But do you want to go ahead and do the next one before we run out of time?
The Milton School. It's located on Milton Road. I don't have an exact address to it, but it is also on the Alton Ghost Tours. Now, the Milton School was built in 1904, and it remained open for 80 years. It closed down for good in the summer of 1984. Now, after the school closed, it was abandoned for a long time, and then it was reopened in the early 1990s as a factory that manufactures items of decorative glass. The company actually still operates there today, and it includes a warehouse, a showroom, an antique mall. Other businesses have also taken up residence in this old building, including a martial arts academy. Now, some believe that only old memories still haunt the corridors of this school, and the legends of the place, though, tell a different story. Now, according to these stories, an event occurred in the late 1930s, and this story cannot be found in any of the newspapers of that time. Now, some believe that this shows that the entire haunting is actually a product of over-imaginations or an outright hoax. And that the story is only a legend. But there is something that lurks in the darkness of this building. Now, there is a story of a murdered girl. And some people say that this is just an Alton ghost lore. And some people think it's made up, while others think that it's a true story. Back then, supposedly a girl was murdered in the school, and I can see why it wouldn't be in the newspapers, because back then, they wouldn't want people to take their kids out of this school. So they would hide the fact. That's exactly what I believe about it. But anyway, according to the legend, one fall afternoon after school had been dismissed for the day, the teachers and students had all left except for one little girl, and the students named her Mary. Now, she was finishing this seasonal bulletin board for her classroom, and by the time she, got done stapling her last little construction paper leaf on the board, the sun nearly set. So she knew that she had to get home before her mom started to worry.
Why was she in school so late? It don't make no sense.
Well, sometimes you get to working on a bulletin board and you just want to get it done.
But me as her parent be like, where the blank is my kid? And I would be looking for him way before the sun was setting.
Oh, I would too. But back in the 1930s, it was a lot safer for a kid to walk the streets than it is now.
If I was alive in the 1930s, my kid would not be roaming it late at night, especially.
Well, if I was alive, in the 1930s and I had a kid in school, she would not be staying that late at school, especially being the only one there. But there's been times that I stayed after school to help a teacher out, doing a bulletin board or something, but I wasn't alone. The teacher was there with me.
That's not true. You had detentions. No, I was kidding.
Okay, some of them were detentions, okay? But anyway, she left the building and set out for home, and she was never seen alive again. In fact, her body was discovered the next morning in the girl's shower room that was in the basement. And her small body was bloody, it was battered, her clothing was torn and scattered about, and she was brutally raped.
Oh my gosh.
Now the hunt for this culprit went on, but the police had absolutely no leads. But apparently during the struggle, Mary had managed to scratch whoever assaulted her because his bloody skin was still under her fingernails. Now, the authorities warned the school officials to be on the lookout for anyone with scrapes or scratches on their hands or their face. And it was several days before anyone realized that a janitor who worked there was missing. He had not been seen since Mary's body was found. And he hadn't been at work for, nearly a week. So the cops went to his house to ask him a few questions about where he was the night that Mary was attacked. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, they found these scratch marks on both of his hands. But he claimed that his cat had left them.
What?
Yeah, he said his cat scratched him. It could happen.
A cat scratch and a people scratch are totally different. A cat scratch is like little razors. Whoosh, a person scratching you is far more wider and different.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But that's what he told him.
I have to interject at some point because I'm having you do the whole show tonight, so I have to say something here or there. So.
Anyway, I lost my train of thought.
He said a cat scratched him.
A cat scratched him. Sorry. I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. But anyway, this man lived with his elderly mother, and she was very, very insistent that he had been sick with the flu, and he was at home with her on the afternoon of the murder. Now, the detectives didn't believe this story, but they had nothing to arrest him for. So they moved him to the top of their list of suspects, but the police officers began driving past his house at night and during the day or whenever, and they kept him under constant surveillance. And rumors began to fly from teachers and staff about the janitor's strange habits and his inappropriate attention to some of the children. And a few days later, the body of the janitor was also discovered in the school. He was found hanging from the end of a rope around an exposed beam above an upstairs hallway, and beneath his dangling feet, they found an overturned chair. And they also found a note that simply read, "I did it." Now, some people speculated that this was the confession of a depraved pedophile, and some wondered if it was an obvious clue left behind by someone who carried out their own brand of vigilante justice. I mean, there were rumors, stories that floated around the school for years about this. And while a lot of the students never learned that the building had this dark past, some of the students there did. And during the years that the school was still open, a lot of students would tell of strange encounters in the building, like odd events, unexplained sounds, strange shadows that didn't belong there.
Oh, like shadowy people or something?
Yeah, but most of these stories were dismissed as nothing more than a creepy old building settling on its foundation, or even the overactive imaginations of elementary school students. But many of the former students to this day, though, tell stories of their strange experiences in this school and encounters with Mary. Years later, though, when Intaglio Design took over the building, some of the employees began to notice some really odd things going on in the place. They heard footsteps in the dark hallways at night when no one else was there. Items began to disappear and appear around the offices. And one of the staff members even spotted the apparition of a small girl. Now, the little girl reportedly became very attached to this one particular employee of the business, a young woman, and her name was not given anywhere. So I'm assuming that she wanted her name to be kept, unknown. But she said that the spirit began to make frequent and sometimes unnerving appearances in her office that was located at the bottom of the stairwell of outside of the gymnasium. And she said that it was not uncommon to find that things in the room had been moved from place to place. And she would also sometimes catch a glimpse of this girl out of the corner of her eye. Now, she would see this little girl playing quietly or sitting on the stairs near her office. On other occasions, the employees, would go into her office and she'd find that someone had been tapping on the keys of her computer keyboard, and they would leave behind this pattern of X's and O's. And there had been no one in the office at the time. But the ghost of this little girl was completely benign. So this employee sort of welcomed her. But the problem was that she said that this little girl was not the only thing haunting the school. She said that there was another presence in the building, and she described that one as being very threatening. The staff believed that this other ghost was the janitor because they had, heard the stories about what had happened in this school. And they figured that he was apparently trapped in the building where, he had committed this terrible, terrible act.
So
And
they're
this,
both the little girl and her killer are stuck in the afterlife in the same building. That's
right.
kind of awful. Hope she doesn't have
Yeah,
to
it
keep
is.
reliving over that experience because of this.
I never found anything about that because that was one of my first thoughts, that this little girl and her killer would be trapped in the same building. And I kind of wonder if maybe they were in different sections of the building, because there have been, ghost hunters had been to this school. There's been a lot of paranormal groups to this school. And I never read anywhere where there was a report of the spirit of this little girl being subdued, or being frightened or anything. I really don't know.
Well, I just hope that she doesn't have to keep reliving this in the afterlife is what my
Really?
thought
Yeah,
is. If
I
they're
do
both
too.
stuck there, it's awful.
But like I said, this woman, this employee, found herself though being stalked by the menacing ghost, of this janitor. And they say, according to reliable witnesses, that she became absolutely terrified by this. And the majority of her encounters, though, took place on the stage area of the gym and down in the hallway behind the girls' shower room. And it was also near the shower room, though, that other staff members reported that there was an unsettling presence that would cause them to become like short of breath and giving them a feeling of panic.
Mm-hmm.
On many occasions, glass items that were left near one particular shower stall was found to be shattered into pieces with no explanations why. And it just so happens that this shower stall was the one that supposedly where Mary's body was found. So I don't know if they were trapped in the same area or not. But eventually the employee became so frightened by all of this that she just simply refused to work in the building at night, and eventually she left her job. And they say that strange things continue to happen at this Milton School even today. Now, I should note, the Milton School is on the ghost tour. And one of my nieces went on this tour several years ago. And while they were in the shower room area, she claims to have seen the little girl. And she also became dizzy and short of breath to the point she had to be carried out of the school.
Whoa.
Now, this niece does not have asthma or any breathing problems.
Right.
But she said that she had to be, practically carried. She said that there was a person on each arm, just holding on to her. She said she never made it out of there.
Wow.
But she does claim that she saw the little girl down there.
Right. We're kind of running over late. I don't know. This is the last story, right?
Right, this is the last story.
Yeah.
But as I said before, Alton is extremely haunted. I mean, several ghost tours are held there each year, and if you live close enough to the area, they are worth taking. They have, they have the walking tour, and they have the one where you ride around. And they also stop at places like the Meridian Coffee House or Just My Desserts, which, by the way, I like that place. And both places are haunted.
Right.
But if you want to find out more information about Alton, I do recommend the book Haunted Alton by Troy Taylor. Now, there are other books about Alton, but I found his to be one of the best, and probably because he used to live there. I used to go to his bookstore all the time and buy up his books.
Well, then he probably appreciates your money that was spent on
I'm
it.
sure he does. As a matter of fact, when I was in his bookstore, I saw the spirit. I was talking to the clerk in there, and all of a sudden I just started watching this little boy go from one wall to another. And he had told me that people told him that they had seen that before. He thought I had seen a cat, and I said, no, what I just saw was not a cat. And he says, he says, people tell me that they have seen that little boy. He says, but in all the time that he had worked there, he had never seen him.
We're going to talk more about other haunted areas in Illinois and probably some more out of Alton. Besides the technical issues, we only have like a 2-hour show or whatever, but we're definitely going to add more about Illinois later when we do a part of the haunted states. But do you want to let everybody know what we're going to do next week?
Yeah, I want to thank our mods for doing a good job. Thank you, Raven, for a good show, and thank you everybody.
Yeah.
And thank you everybody who came in to listen, who tuned into our show, and who are in chat. Join us Tuesday, May 24th at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And we will discuss a viewer's request, the Flatwoods Monster of West Virginia and the Flying Humanoid Witch of Mexico, and other reported cases of similar flying humanoid creatures. Thank you for coming. Please subscribe to us, give us a like, and share us with others on any social media site you may be part of.
Right. I just want to say thank you all for coming. Thanks for sticking with us. Hopefully next week you won't have a storm that'll mess up your Skype and my computer won't decide to crash on itself. But thank you everybody who shared us and for sharing the second link. Thank you for giving us likes and hanging out with us. If you guys want show reminders, you can just go down and click on the cogwheel down by the Spooky&Raven name, and you can go and click to get show reminders there, or you can subscribe to our website and get show reminders there. But thank you, Spooky, and thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Everybody have a great night.
Good night, everyone.